My name is Shaira. I'll be chairing or moderating.
Thank you, Shaira. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Lubna, Nerdeen, Ahad, Jannah.
Thank you. Hi.
How are you, Jenna? I feel like we had this event in New York with you and Mark last year in the summer.
Yeah.
Now it's like expanded version of that.
So we're going live in about... Okay, we are live. I think we're still waiting for a few people though. For Neo, Obakeng, and Professor Mark Lamont Hill.
Yeah.
Hey guys.
Hey.
Hi.
How is everyone?
Good. How are you?
How are you?
I'm good.
I've been really excited about this, but also nervous because it's so many of us. But at the same time, we have two separate panels. So what we'll do is when Jannah does the welcome and I just give a brief overview of how the discussion will go and an introduction to whoever's watching. Welcome to whoever's watching. We're really glad that we can do this. And then we'll go into the first panel and Lubna, yourself, and Jannah and Obakeng and Mark in for the second panel when we're done.
Okay.
That sounds good.
So we'll be stuck with the lawyers from 7 to 8.
It's not that bad.
It's so cool that we have 3 lawyers here. I had no idea.
Yeah.
It was coincidental, actually.
Yeah.
We didn't know that you guys were studying law until I asked Auntie Nadia, and then she
Oh,
told
so
me.
you'd already picked the panel.
Yeah, it was just meant to be.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
مبروك عهد. I didn't know you were studying law. مش عارفة إذا بتتذكريني بقى I met you في 2015 في لبنان مع أمك when you came that year. I don't know if she hears me.
I don't know. I think she's muted as well. Okay, I think we should start. Unless we've got a sense of when Obakeng and them are coming on. I'm just going to check. Okay, I think it might be the case that Obakeng and Professor Mark Lamont Hill are going to join us a bit later because we have the first panel now from 7 to 8. So so let's get started. Thank you so much for making the time to join us on this inaugural webinar on connecting past, present, and future struggles for decolonized education from South Africa to the US to Palestine. This is a webinar series on transnational resistance to settler colonialism. And everyone knows that today is a very important day for South Africans and all freedom-loving people because June 16th is commemorated as Youth Day in South Africa. And today marks 44 years since the historic 1976 Soweto uprising. This day was the starting of what some call the apocalypse of apartheid. Black school children protested the Afrikaans medium decree, which forced Black schools to use Afrikaans as the language of instruction. And this further oppressed and hindered the education of Black students in order to exploit Black labor and to keep the unjust status quo of systematic racism intact. The protests included thousands of students, and unfortunately more than 500 people were killed, and the world watched, some in horror, others in panic, as the apartheid government showed its true colors. The struggles for decolonized education in South Africa were revived by the 2015 Rhodes Must Fall and Fees Must Fall protests in South Africa. These protests have resonated across the world, and currently at the University of Oxford, there are ongoing protests to remove the statue of the murderous land-grabbing racist Cecil John Rhodes. In the USA, the brutal killing of George Floyd has given renewed energy to the Black Lives Matter movement and has shifted mindsets the world over on the role of policing. But not long after George Floyd was publicly slain, the 32-year-old disabled autistic man, Iyad Halak, was killed by Israeli police. In a very different context, in South Africa, the killing of Collins Khosa and more than 19 others under the lockdown at the hands of the South African National Defence Force and the police put a spotlight on violent state securitization. We are collectively outraged, and that is an understatement. But the reason why is because humanity is a universal value. And at the foundation of this is a decolonized education, which instills this in us and helps us to imagine, to organize, and to create a better world. So today, we're really excited to not just talk about these ideas, but to also engage in the work that each of you is doing to create this reality. So in our first panel, we have 3 law students, one who was jailed and called a criminal for fighting for justice. We all know that the law isn't always just, but we'll get into these discussions. Let me just do some quick introductions. We're joined by Nerdine Kiswani. Nerdine, can you just give us a wave? Nerdine is a Palestinian organizer from New York City, and she's the founder and chair of Within Our Lifetime, United for Palestine, a community-based Palestinian youth organization. And she's currently studying law at the Kani School of Law. We're also joined by Neo Mosala. Neo, do you want to just give us a wave? Neo is a student activist from South Africa and the chairperson of Rethinking Economics for Africa at Wits University. REFA is an organization of students building a better economics in society and in the classroom. She's studying law at Wits University. And we're also joined by Ahad Tamimi. Ahad, do you just want to give us a wave? Ahad is a Palestinian activist from the village of Nabi Saleh in the occupied West Bank. She's an ambassador of Shamsan and is known for her struggle against illegal settlement expansion. She was arrested when she was just 16 years old and became a symbol of Palestinian resistance. She's studying law at Birzeit University, where she continues her activism. We're also joined by Jannah Jihad, many know as the youngest journalist in the world. Jannah is going to give us a quick introduction once I'm done, or a quick welcome once I'm done. We're joined by Lubna Kutami, an Al-Shabaka policy member and President's postdoctoral fellow at the University of California, Berkeley. She holds a PhD from the Department of Ethnic Studies at the University of California, Riverside, and is the former executive director of the Arab Cultural and Community Center in San Francisco, as well as a founder, member, and former international general coordinator for the Palestinian Youth Movement. I think I'll do the introductions of Obakeng and Mark when they do join us. For now, I'm going to hand over to Jannah to give us a quick welcome.
Thank you, Sierra. So, welcome everyone. Welcome Shira, welcome Lubna, welcome Neo, Ahad, Nadine, and thank you for joining us today. And I'm like extremely happy that all of you guys are here. So, my name is Jannah. I'm 14 years old. I do journalism, and I'm also Shamsan's ambassador. We decided to make this webinar as a way of building, relationships with people who have been through and are still going through so much problems just because of their identity. We have speakers today from Palestine, from South Africa. We have also speakers from America. And as you guys know, we all share struggles and have been or are still getting subjected to things no human should ever get subjected to. Maybe you've seen all of our posters for this webinar, and on all of our posters we had three main words: connect, talk, and build. So I just wanted to tell you guys, let's connect over shared struggles. Let's talk about what we can change and what we can do to change the world and change the situation. And let's build relationships and grow a social justice movement for a collective liberation. And as you guys know, today is June 16th, and it's also the South African Youth Day. And as a way of respecting the memory of the youth who paid the biggest price of their life making a change in South Africa, they, like so many more Palestinians and also people from the USA, continue to be needlessly killed. So we all need to do more to end all of this and try our best now to make a change in this world by standing up together, united, hand in hand, despite all of our differences, against the violation of every single one of all of our rights as human beings. And again, thank you very much for coming. I'm really excited and really happy to have all of you guys here.
Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you.
So, I mean, we're in a very difficult time all over the world, not just because of this global pandemic that has engulfed every facet of our lives, but also because of the structural violence that continues around the world, and particularly with what we're seeing happen in the United States and the Black Lives Matter movement. We're disturbed at the violence, but we're also really inspired by how people are coming together. And so it's a stressful time as well. And I think I want to just start by asking, what are you guys doing at this moment to keep sane? As you continue to fight, how are you keeping sane in this moment of global crisis? Nardine, can we start with you?
Yeah, sounds good. Honestly, what I've been doing is just, hitting the streets, protesting, expressing, manifesting our rage at the current moment, being in community with people and organizing, building connections with local youth, local groups that are leading these rallies and protests, that are leading these movements. And even within the Palestine movement here in New York City, we've become closer than ever, all of the organizations here, understanding that it's our responsibility as people who live in the United States and as people who are building for liberation in general to stand with and uplift and build the Black liberation struggle as well. I think Nancy, who was supposed to be here from Existence is Resistance, we've been working with them a lot, and they've been doing this stuff with Black youth since, taking Black delegations to Palestine, building around this struggle since 2011. So even just, knowing groups like that, in 2011, I was around Jenna's age, I think. I'm not. Yeah, around that age. So just knowing people who've been doing that work for so long and building these connections across both struggles, but inside of our movement as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Jenna, I'm going to put you on the spot, but you're used to that.
Yeah, of course. So, what Nardine is doing is amazing, and I believe that that's what we should all do. We should all stand up. We should all do our best to kind of make a change. Even here in Palestine, we're trying our best. Last week, I've been in a demonstration that was advocating for how Palestinian lives also matter, how Black lives matter, and to show support between both our struggles, to show support for people around the world who are getting oppressed, because I believe that we Palestinians are like people that we can feel how they're suffering. We can feel how other people are suffering because we're basically going through something similar. We're being oppressed. We're getting killed. We're getting arrested. And yeah.
Yeah. I must say it's just a very poignant moment to have Jannah with, you know, American activists who are also Palestinian, because it's more than just what's currently going on that joins your identity. It's your entire history. So if we can go to Ahad, what are some of your thoughts at this moment, Ahad?
So Ahad is also I'm going to be translating for her. بس بدها اياكي تحكي لها شوية عن شو رأيك بالوضع الحالي انه بأمريكا وهذا. I'm sorry. Yeah.
We have a bit of a technical glitch. Do you guys have echo?
تمام.
Yeah.
عارفة الحالي. أول إشي مرحبا وأهلا وسهلا بجميع اللي بحضروا وأهلا وسهلا فيكم لأنكم معنا.
First of all, welcome everyone. Welcome for being with us. Welcome here. We're very happy to have you all.
وشكرا لوقوفكم معنا ودعمكم دائما.
Thank you for standing with us and thank you for your ongoing support.
طبعا يعني الوضع الحالي بأمريكا يعني الواحد يعني مبسوط إنه خلص الناس طلعت وعبرت عن رأيها. طبعا كلنا بنزعل على العنصرية اللي قاعدة بتصير وكلنا بنأيد إخوتنا اللي دائما دعمونا في مسيرتنا النضالية.
First of all, we're supporting them because, you know, we know how they're struggling and we're standing up with them because they stood up with us throughout our struggle and yeah.
وبتمنى إنه هاي الشغلات اللي قاعدة بتصير بأمريكا تصنع تغيير مش بس لأمريكا نفسها لكل العالم.
And I hope that all these things that are happening in America would make a change, not only in America, but make a change in the whole entire world.
Great. Thank you so much, Ahad. I think that's our sentiment in general. We hope that this moment can radicalize us. So let's get to Neo. What are you up to, Neo? How are you feeling at this moment? It's June 16th. You're a student activist and you're in lockdown. Universities have moved online. What are some of your biggest, you know, thoughts at this point and some of the biggest challenges that you're facing?
Well, not that June 16 commemorations are ever like a happy event, but I think this year is particularly somber with all the things you've been mentioning and just the parallels between the struggle for young people all over the world. Because one thing that is not often highlighted is how the violence when we talk about what's happening in the States, the violence when we talk about what's happening in Palestine, when we talk about what's happening in South Africa, it affects young people, it affects young women, it affects young men, and they are the people who feel the brunt of violence the most. And I think that's what's sort of like driven us to also use the digital space and international solidarity to want to be in community with one another, because we're sort of like very connected with what's happening. So what has been important has been community. I think what's happened now is kind of that even the offline communities that we have, you know, people that we organize with usually on the ground in our daily lives, they've had to all go online. And with the national lockdown in South Africa, it's been a very severe lockdown where, I mean, until last month, we couldn't really leave the province or leave our hometown. So there wasn't any organizing that was possible. And I think that's one of the reasons why the struggle here has been so difficult. The fact that we can't connect with people, the fact that it's very hard to do any type of organizing work when you're not allowed to leave your house, and for good reason. But yeah, communing with people, doing work, just reading, you know, trying to look for these solutions to the problem that are like happening in the world and on my mind. And a lot of education, I think usually most of us don't really have time unless you're reading the things that you read at school or the things that are like in your field of research. We don't really get a lot of time to read. And I said something the other day online, which is that part of the reason why people were able to protest for George Floyd and organize in the mass way that they did is because they're not at work all day, every day. And how like sort of like the 40-hour work week is one of the reasons people don't show support for each other. So there's this assumption that the reason why people don't protest, don't organize, that people aren't angry. People are angry. People are angry all the time. People are outraged all the time. But in the buzz of our lives and us having to work for a living and work for survival and go to school, people don't really get to commune with each other. We live with each other in our neighborhoods, but outside of activist spaces, general society is very located outside of political struggle. Which is ironic because political struggle defines our lives so much. I mean, political struggle, if you think about marginalized communities in the US and South Africa and Palestine and all over the world, our daily life is political struggle, and yet we don't really get to participate politically, because alongside political struggle is that survivalism and the fact that every day we need to go to work, we need to earn a livelihood, we can't organize. People don't even have time to protest. People don't even have time to participate in like formal political structures. So right now, what the lockdown has done is it's given me a lot of time to commune with people I otherwise wouldn't have. I mean, perhaps I wouldn't have even been on this live stream if it wasn't for the lockdown, because it's June 16, I'd probably be doing something else in Johannesburg with other people. But because of this lockdown, we've had to sort of like find alternative connections. And that's the one thing that's been keeping me sane. The fact that it's not just, crisis continuously. There are these breakthroughs and there's a lot of learning that's happening and a lot of understanding of international solidarity and understanding what other people are doing in different parts of the world that we can use here in South Africa to do the work that we need to do.
Absolutely. I was just thinking that if we were doing this in person, I would probably have started with a revolutionary song. I wouldn't be the one singing though, because I can't sing. But that's how we start our events in South Africa. That's how we start our political discussion. Sorry, Jenna?
We can all sing it together though.
Maybe at the end, when I
think towards the end is better. The revolutionary songs tend to also disrupt quite a few meetings, so it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, but we always say that our struggles are connected, and this can often come across as romanticized revolutionary rhetoric. Obviously, I don't believe that, but that is how some people who haven't really given enough thought to exactly how the very tangible, very real ways our struggles are connected exist. I think I want to bring Nerdine in. How do you explain how our struggles are very tangibly linked, Nerdine?
First off, I just want to start by saying that there is differences between our struggles and the way we face them. Even me as a Palestinian, I'm not facing constant checkpoints and military guns to my head the way that, Ahmed and Jenna are, but it's still, we're still in the part of the same struggle. The way that I'm fighting it is as a, Palestinian refugee who was exiled from her homeland and, forced to live somewhere else. So I think, I want to approach this have this mentality for understanding how our struggles are also interconnected with other oppressed peoples around the world. So, not to equate or say that it's exactly the same, but, the Black liberation struggle here is one of the most inspirational, and to me, the most inspirational struggle, historically the most oppressed people in the United States for the longest amount of time, who have been able to make changes throughout history and continue to make changes and make it possible for us to even protest, for us to even stand up, for us to even immigrate to this country in the first place. Understanding that when we talk about like American empire and American imperialism that caused this damage in the first place, that instituted chattel slavery and that funds Israel to bomb our homes and bomb our people in Gaza, you know, we understand that weakening American empire will lift this boot of oppression off of the necks of oppressed people in the United States, the belly of the beast, but also everywhere. You know, we always say the best thing that we can do for Palestinian liberation and for all people's liberation as people living within the belly of the beast is to actually support the Black liberation struggle, because the Black liberation struggle, it has been a guiding tool, a compass for us to follow, to learn from, you know, because of the rich history and the rich organizing constantly being done in Black communities, Black women. And we've seen that across in the past few days. You know, when have protests lasted over 20 days in recent history? You know, who has shut things down? You know, it's Black people. It's undeniable. So, you know, understanding that, you know, the United States has a vested interest in keeping oppression alive here and oppressing Black people is because they are the ultimate threat to this empire. And they are the ones that can help liberate the whole world, because, you know, American imperialism doesn't just, you know, suffocate people here from all walks of life, so many different oppressed people here. But like I said at the beginning, all over the world, we see it in the Philippines, we see it in Mexico, we see it in Palestine, Latin America, Africa. US imperialism sinks its teeth into every single part, every single corner of the world. How many American US bases are there all over the world? And, you know, the best way to fight that is to strengthen, to bring our struggles together, and strengthen the struggles that have been here, you know, before us. We came to the United States way after, you know, Black people have been here, have been building. So we need to uplift that, understand that, and learn from it, so we can continue to build it, not just, you know, kind of take it for ourselves, but also learn from that, because, you know, once we're building and they, you know, people, Black comrades do want us to learn from that, take it to Palestine, and then also contribute what we learn in organizing spaces here and in Palestine, and share it with the Black liberation struggles and movements here as well.
Yeah, that was really greatly articulated, especially about, you know, the military-industrial complex, which we sometimes don't talk about enough. And when we look at South Africa's history, our last arms supporters, well, people who would send us arms and give training to South African police and the army, was Israel. And it's similar now. I think the relationship between apartheid South Africa and apartheid Israel has now been replicated in many ways with the United States and Israel. Not that the United States was not a very important player in the struggle, in still supporting apartheid, and being one of the last to actually support sanctions in South Africa. So if I can come to Ahad. Ahad, you are studying law, and I just wanted to know why did you choose to study law?
طبعا أول ما بلشت أفكر بموضوع إنه أدرس قانون كان عمري تقريبا 11 سنة.
First of all, she started thinking about studying law when she was about 11 years old.
وقتها كان أبوي بالسجن وما كانش معي هوية.
At the time, my dad was in jail, and I didn't have an ID of Palestinian identity.
فما كانش مسموح لي إنه أزوره بزيارة عائلية أو إنه أحضر محكمته.
So I wasn't allowed to visit him or go to his court to see him at least.
وقتها صرت أحكي إنه أنا بدي أصير محامية وأدافع عن حقوق الأسرى الفلسطينيين.
At the time, I was thinking about becoming a lawyer because I wanted to fight for these prisoners' rights.
بعدها بفترة قصيرة استشهد خالي.
After that, like after a short period of time, my uncle actually got murdered by the Israeli occupation.
فأنا رفعنا قضية وطلع الجندي براءة.
and we went to the court because my uncle got killed, but nothing happened to the soldier who killed him, and he got out of jail for nothing.
فأنا وقتها قررت وحطيت الموضوع في بالي وحكيت إنه لازم أدرس قانون عشان أدافع عن حقوق الشهداء والأسرى برا فلسطين وجوا فلسطين.
And then I just put it in my mind that I just wanted to become a lawyer to defend the rights of the prisoners outside Palestine and in Palestine.
Thank you, Ahad. I know that it might be difficult to speak about these things, but it's very important that they are heard. It's very important that your experiences are heard. And we all stand in solidarity with you. I remember back when you were arrested and we had many different actions around your release. And it's so good to see you sitting there. But it also is very sad that or very disturbing that we have so many children who have been imprisoned in Palestine. And political prisoners, that's something that we're familiar with in South Africa. In fact, many of the youth who struggled against apartheid as young school children were arrested. Many of them had to go into exile. And now when they tell their stories, we see how far we've come and how far we still have to go. So when we talk about how far we still have to go, there are different interpretations of what decolonizing education means. And Neo, you're studying law, but you are also the chair of Rethinking Economics for Africa. And I think it would be really good for you to give us an understanding of what decolonizing education means to you, both in your studies, but also as the chair of REFA.
Yeah, thank you, Shaira. So I'm actually a law and an economics student and a politics student. So which isn't something that's usual to study together at my institution, because the nature of colonized education is to sort of like segment things. So you specialize in the one little thing and one understanding of the world that you have, and that's what you're gonna go and do. And we don't really have an integrated education system where I'm studying politics so that I can interrogate the law. I don't take the law at face value. I'm studying the political economy, so I understand the workings of the economy, that it's not just something that operates on natural laws, and this is just how the economic structure is. It's something that people plan. It's something that's a consequence of a history. And I think fundamentally, a decolonized education, like we were talking about idealized struggle, people tend to idealize
Neo?
We can't hear you anymore.
Yeah, I think we're having a bit of a network issue.
Yeah. Oh yeah, her internet, I think.
Okay, let's just see if it refreshes. Okay, while we wait for Neo, Nerdine, what made you choose to study law?
So, like you said, I think at the beginning of this panel, law is not always just. I think a lot of the history of law, particularly in the United States, is oppressive. It's an oppressive tool used to subjugate people. And I want to understand. Sorry. Yeah. And
no, go ahead. We'll go back to Neo when you're done.
Sounds good. Yeah. And I just want to understand and familiarize myself with it so that I can, use it against the oppressors and dismantle and chip away at, oppressive laws here in the United States. So it's not like, I'm not the first person to do this. There's a whole, group of lawyers every year that go to school particularly to do this. And the school that I go to, the CUNY School of Law, kind of, brands itself as a social justice law school, which I don't know if, any academic institution can actually, fulfill that hefty goal. But, at least being somewhere that proclaims that around that people that do, I'm, sinking my intention from right now to, build with these people, and stay connected with them so that we as a team, because nobody can do this alone, challenge the oppressive laws in the United States that are used to subjugate and oppress people every day. Everything that we're talking about at the end of the day goes back to law, but at the same time, I don't want to overemphasize it, the importance of it, because at the end of the day, law responds to power. We've had laws since 1948, UN resolutions since 1948 saying that, what Israel is doing is wrong and that Palestinians should be able to go, have the right to return and go back to their homelands, but that hasn't implemented because power isn't on our side. So also understanding that lawyers and those who wish to represent and advocate for oppressed people must also be on the front lines with them, fighting with them, because if we don't understand that fight, then ultimately we become enveloped into the same institutions that oppress people every day.
Couldn't have said it better. And it also speaks to the current movements across the world at universities, which use the space that they have, the privileged position that they have to be in a university, to also dismantle the structural racism and the structural classism as well, that excludes people from these universities and that dictates what people study and how they study. So the pedagogies as well that need to be decolonized. Nero, let's go back to you. We broke up when you were speaking, so you can just.
I think what Nuruddin said is so important about how we can't just view ourselves as these people that are gonna enter the academy and then study, and then with all our grand knowledge, we're going to change the world. I think so is my network working? Okay, I have terrible.
On and off.
Okay, so let me just wrap up what I was saying. But with the decolonial project, it's very much not something that's just going to happen within institutions like any movement for justice. It's something that needs to occur on the outside of society where we are fighting the power. We can't be the type of lawyers that say we only operate within the confines of the law and riots are illegal. All struggle and all revolution against unjust systems will be against the laws of that society. And what we need to do is be critical of the laws. We need to look at how legal systems need to develop in order to stop hegemony and in order to interrupt the power that's led to this perpetual state where people live under societies where the law doesn't work for them. Like Nuruddin said, I mean, we have all these UN resolutions, we have international law, we have human rights law, but we still see violations because of the power structure, of the hegemonic power structure in which our entire society, locally, globally, how that operates is very important. And when we talk about decolonization, we need to be movement builders. We can't just be students. We can't just be academics. We need to be people that aren't afraid to be on the ground and organize with each other. And that's what I think decolonization is. Yes, it's about challenging the curriculum. Yes, it's about challenging the system. It's about challenging the laws. It's about challenging policy. But ultimately, the pushback, the reclaiming power is going to come from the type of protest that we're seeing in the US right now. That's where the struggle for power really occurs. It doesn't occur in, you know, the halls and the annals of universities. So that's how I perceive decolonization and how we are all sort of like agents within it. And what Shaira said about us being people that are privileged is quite important because not everyone gets to become a law student. The reason why it's such a prestigious thing, it's because it's an exclusionary thing. Being at university is inherently exclusive. Studying certain things, and especially fields where power is centralized, it's something that's exclusive and something that not everyone is allowed to do. And, you know, they'll sort of like let a few people in bits and pieces that aren't supposed to be there, that were never supposed to be there. But it's not really where we belong. It wasn't built for us. And like you said about how you feel like being at the university that you are has sort of like been important for you, I feel the exact same way, because institutions do matter. There are institutions where it's so violent, just your presence there, you being in like the lecture halls and you living there, you can see that it wasn't meant for you. It wasn't meant for people like you. It wasn't meant for women. It wasn't meant for Black people. It wasn't meant for anyone who wasn't a white male. So when we talk about decolonization, it's not a lofty idea, you know, it needs to be about how we sort of like transform the entire structure of society to make sure that people don't have to struggle every single day. You going to school doesn't have to be a struggle. You living doesn't have to be a struggle. People don't have to be imprisoned and their entire existence is just punishment and oppression. So that becomes very important when we talk about decolonization, because colonialism is not like an event in history. It's a template, it's a system, it's a way of organizing society. And when we fight colonialism and we say we're decolonizing, we're not fighting a certain type of state that existed in the 1800s. You know, we're fighting something that's happening now. We're fighting a culture. We're fighting a way in which society is arranged and everything else that comes with that. And yeah, that's just how I view the decolonial project.
Yeah, no, that's so important, because you've given us some practical ways in which RIFA aims to push decolonization, but also the fact that the structural, nature of our society needs to be where we really push our energy and our focus as organizers and activists. So, you know, coloniality, we've been talking about it, but I think it's important to understand that coloniality is a death project, whereas decoloniality is a theory of life. And whatever we do, we're trying to push for life, and we're trying to push for a life that is well lived, a life that is free, a life that is just. And I think that you're in the eye of the storm in some way, because you are living as a Palestinian under occupation, and you are also a symbol of resistance to Palestinians and to people around the world. So in your move to university, I remember seeing the pictures of you standing up to an Israeli soldier, and I was so inspired. But in your move to university, how have you adjusted? And how are you spending your time at university? Are you still very active? I'm sure you are. You can't take someone, you can't change someone like you. You are an activist at heart. So how has that change been for you at university?
So you guys can hear us, right? Okay. هسه بقى قبل ما رحت على الجامعة كنت شفت صورك لما ضربت جنبي وكل أشياء، وهلا مثلا لما أنت في الجامعة كيف بتقضي وقتك؟ كيف تغيرتي؟ أكيد ما تغيرتي. كيف أول إشي مش أحكي عن الموضوع بشكل شخصي أكثر. I'm not going to talk about the subject in a very personal way. إنه بتوقع الإشي اللي بتعرض له كل الطلاب الفلسطينيين بتعرضوا له. Because I believe what I got subjected to is what every single Palestinian student got subjected to. طبعا يعني بدي أحكي شوي عن معاناة الطلاب بالجامعات. I want to talk a little bit about how we as Palestinian students suffer in our universities. طبعا يعني إحنا كطلاب فلسطينيين كثير بنعاني من إنه شوي في مشكلة بحرية الرأي. As Palestinian students, we suffer from this problem in which we cannot really express our feelings or our opinions. يعني شوي النظام السياسي عنا بتقبلش الرأي بشكل يعني منيح. يعني في كثير طلاب عانوا من تكوين النظام السياسي كيف ما بتقبل رأي الآخر. And our political system is pretty much you can say closed-minded, because they cannot they don't allow us to express our feelings or talk about our opinions as students in the right way or in the way we want to talk about it.
وطبعا كمان بنواجه مشكلة إنه الاحتلال بفرض علينا إنه ما نقدر نعبر عن رأينا بشكل حرية.
And also from another side, we have the occupation, which doesn't allow us at all to express our feelings.
يعني طلاب الجامعات دائما فعل عمرهم إنه صاروا أعلى من 18 فبيكون المحاسبة أو الرقابة عليهم أعلى شوي فبيكون كثير ضغط عليهم إنه يطرحوا رأيهم إنه يعبروا عن رأيهم بأي موضوع وطني.
And considering that we university students are right now over 18, which means they would be held accountable for anything they do. They would be even held accountable if they express their opinion about anything political or anything that has to do with the Palestinian issue.
يعني في كثير طلاب حاليا بالسجن بإنه بس مجرد طرحوا رأيهم بالجامعة أو وقفوا مع قضيتهم.
And there are so much Palestinian students, university students that are right now in the Ijali jail just because they stood up and defended their rights and stood up for their struggle and issue.
زي ميس أبو غوش سماح جردات اللي طلعت قبل كم من يوم قسام البرغوثي.
For example, Qassam Barghouti, for example, Samah Jaradat, who got released a couple of days ago, ميس أبو غوش.
هدول اللي فعل إنه دافعوا عن قضيتهم هسه هم موجودين بالسجن وكثير طلاب فلسطينيين غيرهم بالسجن هسه بس لأنه طرحوا رأيهم أو عشان انتمائهم السياسي.
And why are they in jail? They're just in jail because they talked about how they think. They talked about their opinion. They stood up for their rights as Palestinians. And many more students that you may have or have not heard about. There are so much other students who may have just be in jail and arrested right now just because of their political beliefs.
وطبعا يعني كثير بيعانوا الطلاب من مثلا الجامعات العالية زي ما بنعرف إنه النظام الرأسمالي هسه هو اللي بيحكم أي دولة في العالم.
As we know, every single country in the world, the capitalism is basically in everywhere, and a lot of students are suffering from paying their universities, continuing their studies because of the high prices of the classes and everything.
وهالشي بخلي الموضوع الفلسطيني أو الطالب الفلسطيني أصعب إنه الفرد اللي بيعيل العيلة زي الأبو أو الأخ مثلا بيكون يا بالسجن يا شهيد فبضطر الواحد إنه يضيع مثلا سنين من جامعته عشان يشتغل ويدفع.
And considering we Palestinians suffer from a lot of things, usually our parents who are the main source of income for the family are either killed, arrested, or injured and they cannot work or provide a family. So the university student would have to spend so much money on their university and then go work to help their families because they have no income other than this person.
طبعا منساش مع هيك وقوف الجامعات خلال فترة الاحتلال بإنه الحركات الثورية مثلا وقت الانتفاضة الأولى كيف الطلاب كانوا هم لهم دور أساسي ورئيسي في إنه يصنعوا هاي الانتفاضة في إنه يأثروا على الاحتلال في إنه كان دور الطلاب كثير قوي في صنع منظمة التحرير اللي هي كانت بدايتها على الطلاب في الجامعات.
And we can't forget how Palestinian university students have so much, they've done so much in our Palestinian struggle. For example, the first Intifada, they have, like, we should give them so much credit because they are the ones who started it. For example, the PLO. The PLO was an organization who started on the hands of Palestinian students. A lot of other revolutionary protests or a lot of other things that have changed and were meant to change something in our lives as Palestinians were started by university students.
وطبعا الطلاب في كل العالم لهم دور كبير في صنع التغيير حتى في جنوب أفريقيا. كيف لما احنا رحنا على جنوب أفريقيا وكيف كنا نشوف إنه كثير طلاب استشهدوا وهم يدافعوا عن حقهم. وكمان برضو عندنا في فلسطين نفس الإشي، كثير طلاب استشهدوا بالانتفاضة الأولى وقبل وبعد، بس فعلا إنهم حاولوا يصنعوا تغيير ويدافعوا عن حقهم.
And as we know, also students are one of the main reasons, and the people that are able to make a change in a lot of places in the world. For example, when we went to South Africa, we saw how South African students were the ones who were trying to make a change, were the ones who were murdered because they were trying to make a change, were the ones who were affected so much because they were trying to be in a better place.
كمان آخر شيء بدي أحكي إنه دورنا كطلاب في فلسطينيين إنه نبلش نناضل نضال اجتماعي، نغير في مجتمعنا نفسه، في نظرة المجتمع للمرأة، في محاربة الفساد، في تغيير النظام السياسي بشكل كامل عشان نقدر نوصل للمرحلة اللي يكون عندنا نضال الوطني فيها متمكن في وحدة.
Last thing I want to talk about is our role as students. So I believe we should start resisting in what we call social resistance. We should start working on our societies, changing the mindsets of our societies. For example, changing the mindsets towards a woman's role in the society, changing the mindset towards a better political system, a better system in the country in general. And that's something students need to work on.
لأنه بالنسبة إلي النضال الوطني ما بيجي بشكل قوي وشكل صحيح غير تيكون في نضال اجتماعي قبله يغير كل هاي المنظومة السياسية.
Because I believe resistance in general won't work unless we have social resistance that comes before it, so we can be able to make a change in our country or in our world.
إنه شو التحرير اللي بدي أصنعه إذا كان المجتمع نفسه منظر للمرأة بطريقة سلبية أو بنظر أو النظام السياسي فاسد أو لا، لازم الواحد يناضل اجتماعيا ويغير في المجتمع، وبعدها نبلش كطلاب نناضل وطنيا ونحرر بلدنا عشان نيجي على مجتمع منيح، مجتمع عادل، مجتمع بناصر المرأة وحقوقها.
For example, how am I going to liberate a country if its people are still oppressing women for being women? How am I going to liberate a country if we have an extremely bad political system? How am I going to liberate a country if the society in general, the people of this country are not having the right mindset towards becoming liberated and becoming free? So yeah.
Yeah, I think that you've hit the nail on the head in many ways, because there are no one-issue struggles. And there's a revolutionary thread that brings together the history of the PLO and the history of the ANC, for example, in South Africa. There's a revolutionary thread that brings together, the activism of Malcolm X and, the Black Panthers and what was happening in the decolonial movements across Africa at the time. This can go back as far as, the Haitian Revolution, when slaves revolted against colonialism. And for us as young people today, I think we should just end by giving some of our closing thoughts on what makes us hopeful about this moment. So I'll start with Nerdine and then go to Ahad and to Nero.
Yeah, I just want to start off by saying thank you so much to Neo and Ahad for really capturing what it means to be a student and be a youth organizer and activist, and approach this from a sense of decoloniality. And I just want to say that I agree. I do think youth and students are the most open to revolutionary ideas and forces, and if they can provide revolutionary leadership to a larger movement, if it's integrated among broader progressive struggles to build power for oppressed people. And this goes for youth overall, not just students. And that's who we see on the streets today. And, what I really want to come out of this is that these movements are sustained, that organizations are built, that it's not just like a spontaneous moment that dwindles later down, because we know that these leaders of these uprisings will be targeted. They will be targeted moving forward. We've seen that happen in Ferguson with so many activists and organizers found, shot in their cars or mysteriously dead, and we don't want to leave these people to fend for themselves. We have to build organizations. We can't just, we have to move from actually, being activists to organizers, to constantly being in our communities, being there for them. And that's the most important thing that can come out for me, because a lot of this moment is there's an attempt to like whitewash it, liberalize it, and have capitalism once again reconstruct itself to regain legitimacy after it's once again been exposed, and white supremacy as well. And we can't let that happen. We have to continue to expose this, because the reason that we're here now is all the people who kept this movement alive and kept organizing in between these uprisings as well.
Yes, we stand on their shoulders. Neo, what are your closing thoughts? I'm sad that we have to close soon, because it's been such an amazing conversation.
Also, I want to thank all the panelists. I mean, this has been an amazing conversation, but what Nerdine said about not allowing the struggle to be co-opted, not allowing it to sort of like have those ideas that have been keeping society on its knees sneak in through the back door, even amongst us as oppressed peoples. If we say that colonialism is about death and violence, we can't say we are fighting that, but we are killing each other and violating each other, and we are making sure that the person who's more oppressed than us feels that we are more powerful. We cannot allow that. We need to base our struggle on common humanity. We need to base it on not just liberal ideas of equality, but of what in South Africa we call Ubuntu. It's about humanity. It's about making sure that at the end of the day, the struggle doesn't leave anyone behind. And I think that's what international solidarity and even local organizing always comes back to, not conveniencing ourselves by crushing other people under the weight of the power that we have.
Powerful, very powerful. We're gonna close this panel and go into the next one soon. But I just really want to hear what your closing thoughts are before we do that.
طبعا أكثر تعطيني أمل هو المعاناة اللي عشناها كفلسطينيين.
So one of the most things that gives me hope is looking at our history, how we suffered before as Palestinians.
يعني أقدر أحكي لك إحنا بشكل عام كشعب فلسطيني الإشي اللي بعطينا أمل هي الأشياء اللي عشناها قبل، كيف دائما نصنع من الموت حياة.
I want to say that we as Palestinians always, the thing that gives us hope is looking at our history, because we always make from the things that cause death, we make life and we bring life from them.
الإشي اللي بعطيني أمل كمان لما أفكر بالجيل اللي قبلي اللي بعدي، إنه كيف لازم أصنع له وطن حر، وطن منيح يقدر يعيش ويأمن مستقبله فيه، مش يعيش نفس المعاناة اللي أنا عشتها.
Also thinking about the next generation, the generation after me, how I'm gonna try to bring them a better life, make them a better, just make this world better for them, because I want them to live the same life I lived. And looking at how they're gonna live, it just inspires me so much and gives me so much hope.
وكمان حلمي بإنه أصحى وما أشوفش المستوطنة قدامي، حلمي بإنه أصحى وأروح على الجامعة وما أشوفش حاجز، حلمي بإنه عن رأيي بحرية بدون ما أعتقل أو أنهان أو حدا يعني يجي يحط يكبت حريتي. هاي الأشياء كلها بتعطيني أمل إنه أضل أقاوم وأناضل عشان أصنع التغيير اللي يحسن حياتي ويحسن حياة الجيل اللي بعدي.
Dreaming about me waking up and looking out the window, not seeing a settlement in right next to my village, gives me hope. Looking at how I'd go to my university without facing so many checkpoints on my way gives me hope. Looking at how I can express my feelings, express my opinions without getting arrested also gives me hope.
Thank you so much, Ahad. That's a very important and inspiring way to kind of go back into the work that we're all doing, and hopefully shape history in the way that we want to. And I know we've had people from all over the world watching this, from Mauritius, from West Bengal, from the UK, from the US, from Palestine, from South Africa, and beyond. And it's really amazing that this international message of solidarity can be shared with people from your perspectives on the ground. But I think what all of you made mention of is that there is no decoloniality without an end to capitalism. So decommodification of education is just as important as decolonization of education. And these are struggles that cannot be separated. So thank you so much for educating us, for sharing your experiences, and for being so radically honest. More power to each of you and to all of us as we struggle together against this unjust status quo and we create the world that we want to see. I'm going to bring in the next panel, and then we will do introductions and get into that conversation. So if you're watching, please stay. We'll finish this at 9 p.m. I see we've just got Professor Mark Lamont Hill. I'm so sorry about the misunderstanding. You came on earlier and we were still busy with the previous conversation. And we've also got Obakeng Leseyane. The previous conversation was amazing. I'm not sure if you guys were watching, but we're going to talk about the same topic. I'm just going to repeat quickly that this is a webinar series on transnational resistance to settler colonialism. And today is a very important day for South Africans as we commemorate June 16th, the Soweto uprising of 1976. But this is also an important time for everyone on this panel. Professor Mark Lamont Hill, you're in the US. Lubna Kutami, you're also in the US. Professor Mark Lamont Hill, you've been an activist since your days as a youth in Philadelphia. And you've also been a social justice organizer, and you're a founding board member of My Fifth, a nonprofit organization devoted to educating youth about their legal rights and responsibilities. You also hold a PhD with distinction from the University of Pennsylvania, with your research focusing on the intersections between culture, politics, and education in the United States and the Middle East. And you're trained as an anthropologist of education. So it's a very fitting person to have on this discussion as we look into the connecting struggles to decolonize education. Lubna Kutami, welcome as well. You've been on you've kind of sat through the previous panel. Thank you so much. I hope that it was really good for you, and we can talk more about it. Lubna is an Al-Shabaka policy member and is a President's Postdoctoral Fellow at the University of California, Berkeley, She has a PhD from the Department of Ethnic Studies at the University of California, Riverside, and is the former executive director of the Arab Cultural and Community Center in San Francisco, as well as a founding member of the Palestinian Youth Movement. Obakeng, do you want to give us a wave? Obakeng, can you hear us? Obakeng?
Yeah.
Oh,
I
shucks.
can't hear anyone.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me? Because I can't
We
hear
can hear
anyone.
you. Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah. I'm just gonna say, I'm just gonna tell the tech
Okay,
team to
let me try
check on
and
what
do
each might be.
that.
But in the meantime, I'm going to introduce Obakeng. He's an emerging young leader currently working as an associate consultant at Dive Collective and is simultaneously studying towards a BA degree at the University of the Witwatersrand in South Africa. He's a graduate of the African Leadership Academy and recognized as one of the youngest inaugural public service fellows at Apolitical Academy. Obakeng is committed to working at the intersection of education, public policy, strategic development, and in doing so, centering young people. Welcome, Obakeng.
Thank you so much for having me. Can you guys hear me though?
We can hear you. Can you hear us now?
Yeah, I can hear you better. Can I just give a caution? So for about the past week, electricity in my neighborhood has just been going off at the most unexpected times. So there is a chance that during this, it might just switch off, but I will connect shortly afterwards, but it might just be dark. So don't think it's like anything mysterious.
No, it's okay. We know the struggle, load shedding in South Africa.
Sure.
So Obakeng, since you are with us at this point, like let's start with you because we might lose you at a later stage. Hopefully we don't. It's June 16th. There's so much happening in the world. What are you doing to stay sane? And amidst what you're doing to stay sane, how are you spending your time at the moment?
Yeah, so I live and work in Joburg quite a lot, but right now I went home, which is in Rustenburg. It is about 100 kilometers away from Joburg. So the presence of my family has been such an anchoring support, particularly my niece. There's something about being around children that is so not just innocent, but it's like a different motivating force. So that is what I've been doing to stay sane. Spending a lot of time with my niece and listening to all the stories that she has to tell about what she thinks about the coronavirus and what she thinks about the world. That is what I'm doing to stay sane. Just really surrounded by people that really care for me and people that that I also care for.
Great. You're right about the kids. I have 14 nephews and nieces together, and one of the most difficult things about this moment is not being able to see them, but it's incomparable to the struggles that many people are going through. Professor Hill, if we can come to you, you're in the States at the moment. What are you feeling? And you've been on the picket lines for a lot longer than many of us. Does this moment make you hopeful?
First of all, thank you for having me, and hello to Obakeng and Lubna and Jenna and Ahid. It's a pleasure to hang out with you all, and it's good to see Jenna again. I got to hang out with her last year in DC, and I am really proud and honored to be here with you all. I'm inspired right now for so many reasons. It reminds me of in 2014 when we were in Ferguson, Missouri, and we were protesting, and the rebellions that took place in Ferguson were so important for the moment that we're in right now. And similarly, the solidarities that we saw in 2014 have been so significant for making sense of the solidarities that we're experiencing right now. In the United States context, first of all, what excites me is that the language is changing. There was a time where we would, in the 90s, for example, in 1992, a man named Rodney King was beaten by the police in California, Los Angeles, California. And this was pre-cell phone, so it was a big deal to have it on videotape. And this man was beaten by multiple police officers on videotape. And all of America saw it. And all of America said, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. And then the men that beat him were charged. They were arrested, they were charged, they were tried in court, and they were found not guilty. And the city erupted. And we were demanding justice, and the justice would have been a conviction. Over time, we had rebellions when people were killed, Black unarmed people were killed, and we demanded justice. And justice meant charging and arresting and convicting those officers. Even as recently as 5 years ago, we would demand that the officer be arrested and put in jail. And now when I'm on the streets of the United States, we're not demanding more jails. We're not demanding jails for cops. We're demanding abolition. We're saying that we don't want warmer and fuzzier prisons, and we don't want nicer cops. We want a world where policing and prison are not the ways that we resolve our issues, not the ways that we deal with crime and harm and mental illness and homelessness and all these other things. And so we're making a more radical demand. And for me, that's very significant. And when I think about, even in the Palestinian context, the difference between demanding simple political solutions or even unworkable political solutions like two-state solutions against the backdrop of settlement expansion. And I'm hearing the calls on the ground becoming more and more radical, and the radical calls that have always been there becoming more and more pervasive as the mainstream begins to recognize the impossibility of a two-state solution, given the sort of recalcitrance of not just Netanyahu, but a consistent regime of Israeli leadership that has never truly wanted a two-state solution before or after Oslo. And so I'm listening to the radical calls from Palestine. I'm watching the radical calls here in the United States, and I'm super energized by that. But there's one more thing I want to say that energizes me. I got a call last week from no fewer than 20 Palestinians who are in the West Bank or who are in Gaza or who are in 48. And they were saying, how can we show solidarity? How can we support you? What do you need? How can we're admiring we're admiring what's happening. A friend of mine from Fahm texted me and said, I love that you all are tearing shit down. And I'm like, yes. and I'm like, yes, this is exciting. And that kind of re-energized solidarity was beginning in 2014, when people in the West Bank during the 51-day war in Gaza were protesting. People in the West Bank were protesting what was happening in Gaza, but they were also texting us about how to protect ourselves and defend ourselves. And so those relationships that we started in 2014 that are on the backs of a long history of relationships, going back to the 60s and really the 50s, were blooming. And they're blooming, they're taking bloom right now. And so now we're talking about an international fight against settler colonialism and imperialism and authoritarianism. And I couldn't be prouder and happier to be a part of this moment, because there's so much possibility in front of us.
Lubna, let's go straight to you. You've been on the line, and we're really keen to hear what your thoughts are. And does this moment make you really hopeful, and why is that so?
So thank you, everyone. I am really glad to be here, and really appreciated the first panel so much. So I just want to thank everyone for bringing this space together. I am deeply hopeful. I think that this moment is one that is demonstrating the popular will of people, not just within the United States, but globally. I think that there's a lot of, wherever there's a lot of hope, there's also a lot of fear, and there's also a lot of trepidation. For me, I'm someone that really believes in the importance of this moment, that it is a popular uprising in the US, that it does come on the tails of decades of radical Black traditions in the United States, that it is not ahistorical, that it understands the current moment as part of the conditioning of the recent history that brought us to this current moment, and that it has very clear space left for the politics of imagination, that there's so much creativity happening in the streets, happening on webinars, collective conversation between people thinking about both that kind of anti-racist, anti-colonial work of how do we tear this down, right? How do we tear these systemic forms of oppression down? But also the decolonial work, which is about the imagining of the alternative. What do we put in its place? How do we prepare ourselves for that moment? And I think that this is something that people across the world have experienced at different moments in their revolutions and their uprisings. And, these moments don't come around every so often, they happen as a result of a extreme, a complex conglomeration of extreme crisis, extreme grief and pain, but also as a result of so many forms of organizing that have taken place in the years prior that gives this moment its kind of collective energy and collective discourse and collective politics moving forward. I think, as Mark said, so much of the work beforehand had been about police reform, about exposing the police, about cataloging police surveillance and police violence. And now, the work of abolitionists who have been in our history for so long, it's now actually starting to become understood as the only solution to a system. People are understanding that police are not failing to do their job, but that in fact they're doing exactly what they were intended to do. That police from the very get-go was supposed to be a violent authoritative body that was, utilizing racially tinged moral panics around Black criminality and deviance, or people of color being illegal or undocumented, in order to know who to surveil. And I think that the understanding in this moment, even among non-Black communities, that has always been the very purpose of policing, and the prison system in the U.S. is something that has been really inspiring for me.
Yeah, this reminds me of a documentary that I watched by a dear friend, Asia Bandawi, The Feeling of Being Watched, which shows you how the tactics of surveillance and of control and of repression really have their roots in how, the Muslim community is being surveilled now in the same way that the Black community was in the past. So all of these struggles are deeply connected, very tangibly. So if we can go to Jannah, you're in Palestine at the moment, and you were out on the streets protesting in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. You've also been to the US, and you've met Lubna, you've met Mark. How do you feel to be on a panel with them right now, discussing what we're discussing, knowing what's happening in the world at this moment?
So this panel is amazing because, as I said before, our struggles are very similar. Our struggles are, we're basically facing different kinds of oppression from the same system, from the same regime that's being practiced everywhere. That's being practiced in America, that has been practiced or is still practiced in South Africa somehow, and is being practiced in Palestine because we're living under the Israeli occupation. And also, meeting Mark last year was very inspiring. Last year was extremely inspiring for me because after that, I read a lot about him. I read a lot about the Black Lives Matter, which really opened my eyes and made we all are facing similar struggles. And I want to talk a little bit about how it is here in Palestine. It's a very critical time because, a lot of problems have been going on over this pandemic and lockdown period. But in Palestine, we're facing so much, and maybe you have heard about what's happening here. For example, what the autistic young man who has been shot a couple weeks ago in Jerusalem, Iyad al-Hallak, who was shot with literally 10 bullets on his first day of school. He was just walking to his school, and he was just like right next to his school, wanting to go inside of the gate, and his teacher was screaming at the soldiers because he was pointing his weapon at him, and she was screaming, "He's autistic, he doesn't understand, don't shoot at him." And they just shot him with 10 bullets as if he's a criminal. And that's exactly what's also happening in America. people are getting killed just because of their identity, which is extremely wrong, which we should stand up for all of that. And as you said, Shahira, last week, actually last week I was in a demonstration, in a protest. We protested, me, my friends, and a lot of other Palestinians, and actually there were international activists who were stuck in Palestine because of the pandemic. We all went out and held signs that were supporting the Black Lives Matter movement and supporting what's happening in America, because we really do understand what you guys are going through, and we really do stand with you, because throughout all these years of occupation, throughout since 1948, the Black people have been one of our number one supporters. They've been standing up with us throughout all of our history, and we're very proud of that. And we should always stand up for what's wrong. We should always help people, because, you know, getting killed because of your identity, getting killed because of your color, because of your race, because of your religion is extremely wrong, and we should all stand up for that.
Absolutely. Obakeng, if I can bring you in, since you're still with us. Jana's made some powerful comments, so have Mark and Lubna. And right now in South Africa, under lockdown, there's this eerie, abnormal normalcy. I wouldn't call it a normalcy at all, but it's a very weird and difficult time. People are facing hunger. The socio-economic effects of the lockdown have been dire. But on top of that, we've seen poor Black communities being violently policed. What have your observations been in this moment?
Yeah, so I mean, as I was just listening to Mark and Jana, as well as Lubna speaking, I just thought, what tends to be the relationship between violence and fear? Because I just think across the board, particularly like in South Africa, when you account for the fact that most of the cops, most of the soldiers are Black people, you really can't make the case that maybe like in the United States might be that because the cops are white, they have some bias which is unchecked. But you come back home and there is a way that I think we just don't value Black lives, and there's a way in which people's lives are arranged in a hierarchy that, depending on where you live, depending on who you might know, depending on your proximity to influence, as well as the color, color of your skin, we then tend to value lives differently. And I just can't help but wonder that this is the enduring legacy of apartheid, particularly in South Africa, in the sense that I think back on what I know about apartheid and I compare it to right now in terms of the police, the police brutality and the police actions, and I don't see much of a difference. That I think what we deal with in South Africa is thinking about how do we deconstruct the legacy of apartheid, which we have inherited in a form of systems, because it is great that we can be able to prosecute for a case of a single individual, but that tends to be a much more symbolic victory that 2 months from now we're going to deal with a more or less similar case. And what type of systems and structures do we have in place? What type of systems do we need to move to sort of accommodate for the type of existence that we want with systems, essentially? And I sit and I'm to be fair, I am really not surprised, but big part of it is I don't think we have really interrogated our relationship with the legacy of apartheid, particularly in how it lives in systems, from spatial planning to resource allocations to the type of culture that comes with violence that you inherit as a country and as a state. That essentially, going back to what Lubna said, the system is really not broken. It's just doing what it was meant to do. And we haven't really sat and then interrogated the systems that essentially govern our lives. That the key problem also in the times of these types of reactions or these types of big mobilization is that you find that often there's such a big media push behind certain stories that I worry about the ones that just really don't get that type of coverage, because those are the stories that like really show us how so many people fall like fall like within the cracks of whatever system that you have, particularly like in South Africa, like our justice system. We have arguably a very strong constitution, but at the point at which the like rubber hits the ground, we see that a lot of people just like fall through the cracks. That in every single story that we really get a glimpse of, it's often because you have a big media coverage behind it. That I'm like, in the stories and in the statistics that we now know, from gender-based violence to like police brutality, what happens when someone falls through the cracks, or what happens if the media just doesn't have enough space to be able to cover the story. That it's great that we have big like protests, but for me it's about beyond the symbolic victory of charging a certain police officer for like a thing particular case. How then do you then say across the system, regardless of who comes and engages with it, regardless of whether they have media support or not, their case is going to be heard, their case is going to be properly prosecuted? And I worry that even government just responds to the cases that just get media spotlight, and those that don't get media spotlight, which is a big part of the cases, are just left to just fall within the cracks.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's true. There is the politics of exposure that is a global challenge for all justice-loving people. But if we look at Marikana, for example, that was a massacre of minors that was televised. And still, we've had a commission, we've had the Farlam Commission, and still there's been no accountability. The incidents of police brutality when students were protesting in 2016 for free decolonized education, some of us had our hands up. We were shot in the back. We sent statements to the Independent Investigative Bureau, but nothing happened. So I think the structural violence is what we really have to begin addressing. And I think that's what's very exciting about what's happening in the US, is that people have realized that you can't go case by case. You can't look at this on an individual level. You have to look at it at a structural level. So thank you for that, Obakeng. Mark and Lubna, Amilcar Cabral has spoken a lot about cultural resistance. And you've both done work on studying hip hop. Well, Mark, you've done work on studying hip hop pedagogy, and Lubna, you've looked at ethnicity and culture. What do you guys think the role of the arts is in decolonizing education? Because we've spoken about a culture of violence, but what about building a culture of resistance? What role does the arts have in that? Oh, so we'll start with Mark and then come to you, Lubna.
I want to answer that. Just one quick thing, because I think that this is important. Again, this idea of not just resisting structural violence, and the arts speak to this, not just resisting structural violence in the sense of the way that institutions sort of do harm to us on a daily basis, but also when we have these cases that show, whether it's George Floyd or Mike Brown or Breonna Taylor in the United States, or whether it's a case like Iyad Halab in Jerusalem, those kinds of cases are exceptional only to the extent that they, one, are caught on video, and two, that they end in death. But the state is brutal every day. So what happened to George Floyd in Minnesota was what happens every day. The extraordinary thing wasn't that the police used excessive force. It was that police killed someone while using excessive force. Every day the police use excessive force, and every once in a while they kill somebody. And by every once in a while, we're talking days, not years, right? So it's still common, but there's a 50% Black people get beaten, or the use of excessive force happens for Black and brown people in the United States 50% more than white people. Similarly, in the Palestinian context and in the South African context, the state uses violence against its citizens all day, every day, right? And then every once in a while, when like Iyad gets shot, it's like, oh my God. But there's illegal stops and searches and frisks and beatings and shootings in Jerusalem every day. And so that's the extraordinary part. And so that's key. And I think part of what the arts help us do is narrate those experiences. They create room and they create space for us to be able to tell our stories, so when I listen to Tupac, or I'm listening to Kendrick Lamar, or I'm listening to Nas back in the day, my era, you know, or I'm listening to Chance the Rapper now in the United States, just as some examples, or No Name, who's a wonderful rapper out of Chicago, who's also doing abolition work. When I'm listening to these artists, I'm hearing what everyday life is like in the ghetto, in the hood, in economically deprived neighborhoods, and I'm able to understand the pain through daily life. So for me, the arts are an opportunity for us to intervene. One of the most some of the most beautiful things I've seen when I'm in Palestine are murals and graffiti, right? So I can see, I can't go 2 blocks in the West Bank without seeing Marwan Barghouti on a wall, or you know, or if I go to, and there's some politics around this, but even if I just look at the apartheid wall or the separation wall in Bethlehem, right? When you look at George Floyd on that wall, that's not just solidarity; it's an expression of a certain kind of political, a certain kind of political analysis. And so, for me, the beauty of art is that it can tell those stories. And so, I'm looking for art to do more of that, right? I'm not just in music, but in theater. I mean, if you think about Bawalian Theater of the Oppressed, or Hakawati Theater in Palestine, or, I mean, there are all these spaces where people are telling their stories and pushing back that I think are so beautiful and inspiring.
Yeah, I think, Mark, thank you for that. I think that it's just such a wonderful explanation. I think culture is the means in which we can collectively make our stories known, not just to our own selves and to future generations, but to other communities and other geographic coordinates and places in the world. I think for me, like, when I think about cultural production or arts and resistance, it's very important to think about, you know, if colonization and racist state violence works as well on the land and the body as it does on the mind, then we're in for big trouble, you know. And Ahad earlier talked about, like, how do we do the work of liberation if we don't live within a society that can accept a diversity of political thought, that can accept people having their own opinions, an expression of those opinions, a space for a collective synthesis and collective sense of agreement to come to that. And I think the work of cultural production should and is exactly that. It is about communities coming together to produce something that defines them collectively. And I think one of the dangers sometimes that we feel that we have with art, you know, arts and cultural production is the way that it's sometimes misinterpreted to be hollowed of its historic meaning, or hollowed of its collective, the collective people and communities that produce it. I teach ethnic studies in a classroom every year. When I ask what do you all want to learn this quarter, everyone says, I want to learn about different culture. I want to learn about different people's cultures. And I know that what they mean is I want to learn about food and dance and cultural garments that people wear. But we're not necessarily thinking about culture as the rich histories of resistance that produce those items as, icons of someone's history. So even in the Palestinian context, when we think about the kufiyya, we see people all around the world wearing a kufiyya. But do people have this intimate relationship with the kufiyya and the stories of peasant revolt that it represents from Palestinian history, the relationship of Palestinians to their land, and how we didn't see land as a property for, you know, being ravaged and owned and commodified, but that land was a guide for our lives, for many of our village-based communities? Or does the kufiyya represent the guerrilla insurgency that it once represented for the Palestinian radical tradition, you know? So I think these histories that accompany cultural icons and artifacts and the production that we do in arts is really, really important, because if we don't make our own stories, we'll be erased just as our landscapes and communities are being erased.
There's so much to unpack there, but we're gonna come back to some of these questions, some of these issues that you've both raised so eloquently. Jannah, to bring you in, because you've got a lot to say as well. You're wearing a kufiyya right now. What does it symbolize to you as a young Palestinian? And when you see other people in solidarity with Palestine, do you feel that there is a complete understanding of the history, or do you think that through your journalism, you're hoping you can also really interrogate some of the overlaps between different issues? So I had mentioned for women in Palestine, there are struggles. For youth in Palestine, there are struggles. But also as a student, you know, you're juggling being a journalist and you're juggling being at school. How do you balance these things?
Of course. So about the kafia, of course, the kafia really reminds me of a lot of things. Photos of my grandparents, photos of my great-grandpa wearing his kafia on his head and just working, picking olives, and, you know, it just brings me back to our history, brings me back to the struggles that these people have struggled to get us here. It brings me back to how my grandpa went to jail, and then he got, you know, deported out of Palestine for tens of years, and how I literally saw photos of how he reacted when he first came to Palestine, which is amazing. And just wearing this kafia, it gives me all these flashbacks and all these, you know, things just come in my mind. It brings me back to the Nakba, to the Naksa, the first Intifada. It brings me back to everything that we as Palestinians have been through. And also about, you know, how people don't really know about the Palestinian issue. As you said, I try to use my journalism as a way of documenting things that are happening and sending the truth to the people around the world. Like sometimes when I went to America, for example, I'd meet someone in the street and they'd be like, "Hi, where are you from?" I'd be from I'd say I'm from Palestine. They'd be like, "Pakistan?" I'd be like, "No, Palestine." And then when I bring up Israel, they'd be, "Oh yeah, that's right next to Jordan." And you know, it's annoying because people know Israel as the only democracy in the West, in the Middle East, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, Israel is beautiful," and they literally know nothing about Palestine. For example, they went to Turkey. The literal only thing they know about Palestine is Gaza. They think that Palestine is just Gaza. And, you know, a lot of people suffer in Gaza. We're not saying that they don't, but Palestine is all Palestine. People are suffering everywhere. People are getting killed in every single place in Palestine, getting arrested. And I want to also talk about our struggles as Palestinian students. So, you know, education under occupation is what we call it. Education is under occupation is extremely hard. It's not easy because, for example, our movement is controlled through military checkpoints with armed soldiers, and there's always danger and uncertainty in our daily lives. For example, I'm just going to talk about myself a little bit. My school is in Ramallah, which is about 20 to 25 minutes away from my home village, Nabi Saleh. So every day I go to my school and everything, and I personally face 2 checkpoints. The first checkpoint is the hardest. It's put on the entrance of the village. And obviously, checkpoints in the West Bank are not checkpoints. They're basically just blocking the street, and soldiers would just go back. There would be no soldiers sometimes. They just block the street, and we cannot go in or cannot go out. And if that happens, I'd have to take another way that is possibly also closed by a military checkpoint that takes me about 3 hours and a half instead of 25 minutes to reach my school as a Palestinian student, which sometimes I reach my school extremely late. I'd miss so much classes. I'd miss so much things. And as students, for us students, it's extremely hard for us. And the journey to school is extremely dangerous because even on checkpoint, you might get killed, you might get arrested as a child. And as children, we also face extreme hardships and violence. For example, as I said, we children can get arrested. In the Israeli military law, it says if you're a Palestinian child, only a Palestinian child, obviously, if you're a Palestinian child 12 years old and up, you can get arrested, interrogated, treated like a criminal because of your identity or because of you trying to defend your land, your house, your rights, yourself. And you can get arrested at any time. Sometimes we get arrested from our houses at night, like what happened with Ahad. A lot of children get arrested on checkpoints and many other ways. And after you get arrested, we basically suffer violent interrogations. These interrogations might stay for like a couple weeks, a couple months, which is extremely hard because, for example, in Ahad's case, she had continuously 11 hours of interrogation. My cousin, Muhammad, he had literally 24 hours of interrogation. The interrogators would switch shifts, and he'd face extreme violence. He cannot sleep at night. He wouldn't be able to sometimes use the restroom, and he was just a child. And you can be imprisoned for months without even being charged. You're not allowed to, your family's not allowed to visit you, and it's extremely bad. Just imagine yourself in the place of these children. Also, I'd like to also talk a little bit about the story of a child. His name is Hassan. He's from a village right next to us. It's called Deir Ndam. So Hassan, at the time, he was 17 years old. It was in 2015, and Hassan, he suffers from a condition. He has to follow a certain diet, and he has to take medications every single day. So at the time, the soldiers arrested him, and the Israeli soldiers obviously arrested him. And when he got arrested, they refused to bring him his medications. He's a child who suffers from a medical issue, and if he doesn't get his medications, he might suffer from a lot of different things. And after a couple of days, he started getting extremely weak. Even the prisoners had stood up for him and were trying to get him help, and were saying to the soldiers and to the people, to their lawyers, that this child is literally getting weaker by the day and he cannot do anything. And then after a couple of weeks, he got into a coma. After he got into a coma, they took him to the hospital, and he was in a very critical condition. And when he woke up, he had lost his sight. And a 17-year-old child had lost his sight in the Israeli jails because they didn't bring him his medications. And he's right now 19 years old because he lost his sight. In the past couple of years, he'd been trying to adapt to the situation, and he lost so much school years. And this year, he's repeating his school year that he missed when he was 17 years old, and he's now 19. He's older now. And you just like imagine how many school and university students are losing their dreams every day due to the occupation's actions, and arresting them and making their lives so much harder. And yeah, that's exactly what we face as Palestinian children living under the Israeli military occupation on our daily basis.
Yeah, and these stories are so reminiscent of our past as South Africans. So it really is difficult to hear what you're saying, Jannah, because some people describe Israel as the last colony in a post-colonial world, and we can debate that, because when we say post-colonial, so much of the world represents the systems and the structures that colonialism created. So can we really say that we're post-colonialism? And Obakeng, I'm going to bring you in here because you're studying development. You understand as a democracy now, South Africa has overcome many challenges. But when it comes to development and decolonizing what that means, and creating the reality that we want for our country and for the world, how do we go about grappling with the contradictions that we come across? Development is a very fraught concept. So I just want to hear what some of your thoughts are in terms of decolonizing education and studying development as a student?
Yeah, so I mean, firstly, let me just say, when I was just listening to Jana, I was just thinking it's one thing to hear the numbers, but it's another to just hear the stories of people just like behind those numbers. I mean, it just hit something in me when you were telling the story about the boy who just lost his sight, that I'm like, that is the part that I often think is lacking either in the reporting of news and maybe with better training for like journalists, you can do a bit more on that narrative, narrative reporting, because I just think it really hits a different element in you. But just like around development in South Africa, I think in many ways we live in a juxtaposition of those that do have and those that don't have, which is more or less how the apartheid system had like more or less created it, from the education system to the spatial planning, that we sit and then we ask ourselves, we have had a government being like in power since 1994, and I guess relative across to how fast or how slow development occurs across the world, it might seem like a very short time. But then you sit and then you like interrogate what has the parties that have had power done essentially in the past years, and you have very little to like look forward to. And I will just make an example with a lady that I saw beginning of lockdown saying thank you to the virus that she finally managed to get water. So this was a fairly old woman who I assumed voted in 1994, and it has taken this long to like just get her access to water. Whereas if you maybe compare some of the very strong juxtapositions, such as maybe Cape Town and Khayelitsha, or you look at Sandton and Alexandra, is that you find that inequality lives in such close proximity with like wealth or like privilege, in a way that I think there's a certain level of numbness that we have developed out of just seeing how bad things are. And I think I heard Lubna speak about this quite a lot, about like, how have we got to the point where it is normal that people that can live in such a close radius with like each other really don't have access to the same basic services, from just access to water. That it was very funny actually, because I was just trying to think about, well, I think I know Mark from, and him and I once I think he spoke at the Doha debates before like I did, and then shortly after my talk, which was about water scarcity, is that I went back to my grandmother's house in Soweto. Funny enough, there was literally no water. I was like, it's like one thing to speak about development in a sense of, oh, we're just trying to be on the level of Western countries, but at a very basic level, we fail even like under COVID to just say how best do we preserve people's lives. And the key part of it is that people have to wash their hands, people have to keep good like hygiene. But if you have people for the past 20 years odd who have just not had access to something as basic as water, what then like happens when you then have a Department of Basic Education that wants to suggest that a use of devices, by devices I mean iPads, tablets, is the way to go in thinking about education reform, when then you sit back, you're like 78% of South African grade 4 students can just not read for meaning. They just don't understand what they have read. So now you just sit back, you're like, these same people that don't have the basic social conditions to be able to learn, you are now like thinking that by just giving them a laptop or like giving them an iPad, you're going to somehow accelerate their accelerate the learning progress, which, like, to be fair, things prove otherwise. Is that it's fine, you're going to give them the iPads, you're going to give them the laptops, you're going to try to provide internet where possible. But for those people, the key biggest concern is, do I have food to eat? If not, I'm probably going to sell that iPad. So I think there's a way of saying, how best do we think about development in the context of where we are, not in the way that the world is. That maybe, like, if you look at Finland, iPad works completely fine because those people have met the very basic conditions needed for learning. But you come back to South Africa, you're like, there are so many people who just live below the poverty rate, and and the challenges we just even have with the strength of our curriculum, going back to the idea of we have like really inherited a largely unjust system, regardless of, I mean, currently governments spends about 16% of their national budget on just education alone. 6% of their GDP is spent on education every single year. That is around about 260 billion. That is a lot of money. We spend more than our neighbors, but our outcomes prove otherwise. That a big part of it is we have just not met the basic social conditions needed for learning. And the story that
the
Jenna
systems.
and this and like the story that like Jenna tells for me of the type of barriers that a child has to go through to learn. How can that be normal? It's absurd that it is just so normal that, oh my God, these students go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to just access very basic learning. That for me, I guess my biggest challenge is in thinking about development work, how do I challenge my numbness to what I have been like conditioned to? It's like almost normal that next to a squatter camp, there is a fairly well-developed place, and that's not human.
So we talked a bit about water, and both for Palestine, for the US, for South Africa, water is life. And there are structural challenges to access. In the case of Palestine, water supplies have been captured, and you know there's very little ways in which Palestinians can actually access water, their water. If we look at the case of the US and Flint, you know it's really clear to see that the US is much more interested in sending money to Israel than actually servicing its people, depending on which communities you come from. So Lubna and Mark, if we talk about divestment versus investment, what are some of the debates that might be happening at this time when we look at the solidarity with Palestine from the Black Lives Movement that has been very, very strong?
Lubna, you want to go first?
Lubna?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to comment a little bit on South Africa, if that's okay. I partook in a Palestinian youth delegation. I partook in a Palestinian youth delegation to South Africa last year in Johannesburg in partnership with the Afro Mideast Center. And I have to say, in our visit, Obakeng, as you were speaking, in our visit to Soweto, we learned about Hector Peterson. We visited the museum, and one of the real things that like struck a nerve with so many of the Palestinian youth, we were coming from all over the world, was this parallel understanding of how Hector Peterson's image, the slain schoolboy during the 1976 uprisings, how much it paralleled our feelings about Mohammed al-Durra in 2000, the young schoolboy who was shot hiding behind his father in the Gaza Strip. And, you know, for some of us who were Palestinian youth who were coming from the US, those images and the kind of the feelings that they stoke in people of a shared experience, it really reminded us of the way that people really were drawing toward the story of Mike Brown in Ferguson in 2014, a young man that laid in a pool of his own blood for 4 hours, right? So I think I just wanted to bring that up because I know that when we talk about the relationship between these struggles across the world, sometimes, as we talked about earlier, there's all these romantic political slogans, but there are very important parallels of experiences of grief and images of grief that mobilize people's affective ethos of understanding how that struggle is connected to their own. And I think that that's connected to the very material relationship of cooperation between the apartheid regime in South Africa and Israel and the United States, the way that they learned from each other on how to criminalize and create all this kind of terrorism legislation as early as 1967 in South Africa and in Palestine and in the US. That material relationship between those forces is what create, and the shared experience of grief amongst oppressed people across the world is what made us invest in one another's struggles, right? And so by investing in one another's struggles, what I mean by that is that was the breeding grounds that gave rise to the very intimate joint struggle forms of relationships between Palestinian, Black radical insurgents in the US and South African revolutionaries, whether they were training together in guerrilla refugee camps or whether they were extending messages of solidarity, participating in cultural festivals across the world. And I think that if to connect it to your last question, Shaira, like when we're talking about investment, divestment, we can always continue to do this work around BDS, the divestment work that we, quite frankly, as Palestinians, we're really drawing our cue from the divestment work to make South Africa ungovernable during the apartheid period. But I think, you know, as Oba King mentioned, you know, official apartheid in South Africa ended in 94. Official Jim Crow ended in the United States in 64. But the de facto versions of those systemic forms of oppression still exist. And so we are trying to figure out ways to invest in one another's struggles by lending shared tips and tools and methods, by learning from each other, by reorganizing our own philosophies and framework based on the learned lessons of other movements. And I, quite frankly, as a Palestinian who lives in the United States, both South Africa and the Black struggle in the US have been so important, such important reference points for us as Palestinian youth in North America, cultivating our own resistance, consciousness and strategies.
Thank you, Lubna. I know, Mark, I'm going to come to you now. I just wanted to quickly say that when you look at the relationship between Cecile John Rhodes and Theodore Herzl, it becomes even more apparent, you know, and there's actually a letter that Theodore Herzl, who, for those who don't know on the call, is the founder of Zionism. He's the founding father of Zionism as a political ideology. He actually said he wrote to Cecile John Rhodes and he said, "You are being invited to help make history. That cannot frighten you, nor will you laugh at it." And he goes on to say that how indeed will you support us? Because it is something colonial. And what he was referring to, this something that he refers to in this letter, is the creation of a Jewish homeland on Palestinian land. So as we protest, and we've, you know, roads has fallen at UCT, the University of Cape Town, currently at the University of Oxford, there are protests to remove his statue and to address his legacy. And, you know, a Palestinian refugee spoke at one of the rallies in Oxford a few days ago, and the Rhodes Must Fall committee came under a lot of pressure from the Jewish society because they were accusing them of anti-Semitism. But how can that be? Because the project of Israel started in the UK, and these struggles are inherently, or these colonial legacies cannot be separated from one another. So just my 2 cents before we come to you, Mark.
No, I mean, you're making some interesting connections around the international dimensions of not just our liberation project, but the forces from which we want to gain liberation. That's an important piece of the analysis here. Your question was about sort of Black Lives, with regard to Black Lives Matter, what we're asking for, what some of our demands were, and some of the political work that's happening with regard to this question of investments and divestments. And I think that that's an important question. The first thing I'd say is, though, the Black Lives Matter movement stands on the shoulders politically of so many other early movements. The Black Lives Matter as a movement was largely was founded and organized by 3 Black women, Opal Tometi, Patrisse Cullors, and Alicia Garza. I think it's always important to name them because women, and particularly Black women, get erased out of history so often. So it's important to tell that story. And part of what those sisters had was a deep sense of history and a deep connection to the movements that preceded them. And so when you look at Black Lives Matter, part of why Black Lives Matter is such a robust political movement is because it was never parochial. It was never local. Black Lives Matter was never just about what was happening with Trayvon Martin or with Michael Brown in Florida or in Missouri. It was about state violence, but it was anchored by an understanding that state violence, and this was Jenna's point earlier, is that the state violence that we experience is connected to a global landscape of violence, right? Global structures of power, global mechanisms of capital. I can't understand what's happening in Ferguson if I don't also understand what's happening in South Africa, you know, or Venezuela. And so this is all part of the conversation. And so the Black Lives Matter movement, when the movement for Black Lives more broadly sort of articulates a set of policy demands, it wasn't just stop beating us. We weren't making civil rights demands for the state to just stop doing harm to us. We were trying to engage in something called world making, right? It wasn't just about nation building. It was about world making. It was about how can we reshape this world in a way that creates more justice for everybody. And the Black feminist tradition and the leaders of BLM were Black feminists have always wedged open that kind of room. Angela Davis was always trying to open up that room. Ruth Gilmore was always trying to open up that room. So we could talk about police violence. We could also talk about abolition, and we could also talk about Palestine, and we could also talk about apartheid. And we had to talk about all these things in conversation with each other. And so it's no surprise that the movement for Black Lives wants to see the end of the occupation of Palestine as a key component, that demanding boycott, divestment, and sanctions as a mechanism for achieving Palestinian, not just human rights, which becomes a liberal discourse, but freedom, self-determination, in full liberation of the Palestinian people, that can only come through resistance. And BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions, a nonviolent form of resistance, has been a primary call out of Palestinian civil society that BLM, Black Lives Matter, has responded to affirmatively and said, yes, this is a project that we support. But the last thing I want to say is, again, there's a long tradition of this. So while these energies are being reignited and re-energized, and we're very excited and proud to be part of a movement that is in conversation with people in South Africa and Palestine and all over the world, really. It's also important, again, to say that the Black liberation movement has inspired movements around the world and been inspired by movements around the world. So when I go into Palestine and I meet people like what is his name, Reuven. He's the Black Panther Party that was founded in Palestine, right, in the 1970s, was created by Reuven. I can't think of his last name right at this moment. It was a Moroccan Jew who immigrated to Palestine after the Nakba, and or his family did. And they said, wait a minute, the way we're being racialized and the way we're being constructed is something that we need to think through. And the Black Panther Party's iconography and ideology and practice is instructive to us. When, the Black Lives Matter movement comes out of a tradition of SNCC, the Southern Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which after the 1967 war was responded with a newsletter written by Ethel Minor, another Black woman, who said, wait a minute, this is a colonial question. What's happening in Palestine is a colonial question, and a settler colonial question, and we need to think about that in that context. And all of this, also it's important to think about is not just in the context of West versus non-West, right, or global North versus global South. We also have to think about the relationships between the global South and other global spaces in the global South that we're organizing and learning from one another, that then we in the West look to for instruction as well. So the question for me is also, what are Palestinians doing with other Arab nations, right? What are Palestinians doing in South Africa? What is the relationship between the ANC, or more specifically with Nelson Mandela and even Yasser Arafat? Because the moment Mandela comes home, he's in conversation with Yasser Arafat, right? And the West is saying, wait a minute, why are you friends with him? We like you now, Mandela. And he's like, wait a minute, the PLO's been with us from day one, and y'all can't tell us who to be friends with. And so these types of models are also instructive to BLM. So at this juncture in history, Black Lives Matter movement is standing on some very sturdy historical shoulders that have shown us that global solidarities are necessary. And it doesn't mean we have to all be experiencing the exact same thing in the same way, but we need an analysis that's robust enough to understand that we can't get free unless everybody's free.
Yep. And I think with history, it's a living thing. And what we're seeing is inspiring precisely because you have oppressed people reclaiming their history and taking a stand and organizing, not just around an issue, but around a different way of living. And in the previous panel, we had said that, you know, colonialism or coloniality is referred to a death project, but decoloniality is the theory of life. And so it's been so great to have each of you give us your perspectives on your theory of life, which is our shared theory of life, which we will hopefully continue to struggle towards. And there's a quote by a Uruguayan writer, Eduardo Galeano, who's one of my favorite writers. And he says that utopia lies at the horizon, and each step I take forward to it, it moves further away from me. But what then is the point of utopia? It's to move forward. Mm-hmm. So in a South African context where we find ourselves now questioning policing, we have a lot of learning to do about the abolitionist tradition. And I'm hoping that we can share more conversations around this going forward. We've also got some readings that we've put together from a Global South perspective around police, around the colonial roots of policing, and around decolonizing what we understand about policing in our particular context. So we've run out of time. It's now 9 o'clock. I'm just going to give each of you a chance to give your closing comments, and then we will hopefully not say goodbye forever, but just you know, we'll talk again soon, inshallah, God willing. Jannah, do you want to start?
Of course, yeah. So today I've been trying to talk a little bit more about education for us as Palestinian students and as Palestinian children and youth. So I'd like to also let all the viewers and all you guys know that we as Shamsan have also, because of the importance of the education and because we know that if we want to make a difference in this world, we have to start by changing the mindsets of the society, by educating our youth, because they're the leaders of tomorrow and they're the ones who are able to make a change and, you know, to just make this world a better place and a better world. So we launched a fund to support Palestinian students, and we're helping right now at the moment 102 students financially from different places in Palestine, because you know, as you guys have heard, how we as Palestinian students suffer a lot, and you heard from Ahd how Palestinian university students suffer, and you also have talked about how universities and education is basically colonized, and we're basically living in a capitalist countries who are just trying to get money and everything. So we just wanted to support the students because, first of all, they're the ones who are supposed to fight this occupation. They're the ones who are supposed to make a difference in the world. They're the ones who are supposed to be able to liberate Palestine, not only Palestine, we just want a collective liberation for the whole entire world, to grow a social justice movement to make this world a better place. And we're also planning on doing an Adopt a Student program, which you can find all that on Shamsan's page. But I just wanted to mention how important education is for us, and because especially we're right now concentrating on Palestinian university students, and there are so many Palestinian university students in jails right now. There are so many Palestinian university students who are being subjected to violence, being subjected to so many things they shouldn't be subjected to. The occupation is preventing them from reaching their dreams to serve their communities, to serve the world they're living in, and to just change everything. And I believe we should all support them and support every single person who's aiming on making a change, willing to make a change.
Jannah, you'll share the details as well in the chat, maybe. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jannah. Lubna, can we come to you?
Sure. So thank you everyone for such a wonderful conversation. I think what I would just want to leave us with is thinking really about, today is South African Youth Day. I want to just really affirm the importance of youth and youth movements in revolutionary struggles across the world. Every single revolutionary struggle has usually emerged out of youth, out of student and youth movements. In the Palestinian tradition, after the 1948 Nakba, youth movements were the first who really inaugurated the revolutionary ethos that led to our revolution. And whether it was the 1968 student strikes in the United States led by the Black Student Union and the Third World Liberation Front at San Francisco State University that realized a decolonization of education with the introduction of ethnic studies, or if it's the current Rhodes and Fees Must Fall movements in South Africa, I think students and youth have really played an instrumental role through culture, through arts, through resistance, and through revolutionary political programs that's always fought against colonial systems, through their anti-colonial resistance, and through the decolonial work of envisioning, creating, and thinking about the alternative we need. So I don't want people to think of youth as just like empty vessels that can be indoctrinated or pathologized as innocent and naive, because they really are some of the strongest people that we have, agents of history making that we have on our side.
Absolutely. Obakeng, I saw you were nodding in very strong agreement. What are your closing thoughts on this note?
Yeah, so I mean, I just think last week the Constitutional Court of South Africa made a very strong remark on the Electoral Act, which like previously meant that to be able to run in the country, you had to be part of a political party. And hopefully in the next 2 months, we can have a hybrid of the two. And as Lubna was just speaking about the age issue, I think in Africa and in South Africa as well, is that the like average age of a citizen across the African continent is 18. The average age of a South African is 26. Those are largely young people. And there's a world where we then begin to say, how do we take part in politics, not just as spectators, but actually be part of these hard conversations to say, we trying to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in this political machinery, and we failed by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And for me, what is really, really interesting and what I'm looking forward to is that by the year 2024, hopefully we have figured out a way in which we can let independent candidates and political parties run. And I think that's really going to bring a different level of competitiveness to politics. It's going to bring a whole different level of accountability. But then also it's going to be a system that is not like without fault, that it too we are like going to criticize and keep on refining. But essentially for me, I think in South Africa, we have now a pathway that is highlighted by the Constitutional Court that can allow for a much more active role for like young people to play like in politics, which I'm hoping that we're going to take up and really make the like most of it, because it's just one thing to just really have a conversation, and it's another type of platform in which you can particularly begin to rethink how best do we serve people, how best do we ensure that systems work for the citizens, and the most important person in that electoral system remains the citizen. So I am looking forward to seeing the role that I think young South Africans are going to play, given particularly from now up until when Parliament is supposed to report on the Electoral Act amendments, because I think we have a role in co-designing the policy and the framework that we're going to be held by when it comes to the electoral system that we're going to adopt, hopefully by 2024.
That's great. That's great, Obakeng. As you were speaking, I was thinking about a very poignant quote from an activist who is an Iranian American from, obviously in the US. Her name is Hoda Katebi, and she said, "You can have a seat at the table, but still be on the menu." So while we, look at these opportunities in politics, we also need to not forget that organizing on the ground, on the streets, being on the picket lines, understanding what people are saying outside of just the political elite spaces is what really will bring the change.
Yeah.
So on that note, Professor Mark, what are your closing thoughts?
Just that I'm excited to have been here, and the moment we're in is one that is rich with possibility. It's ripe with possibility. We have to continue to organize together. We've done much of the symbolic work of sharing tweets and emails, and we've begun to do some of the organizing work. But there's so much more work to be done in terms of at the level of analysis, at the level of institution building, and at the level of education. And I think that what will come out of this conversation is a commitment to doing those things, a commitment to figuring out what each other's needs are, what we need from each other in order to be victorious in our respective struggles. But we will be victorious in our struggle. We will win. And that's that sense of steadfastness that pervades the Black American experience, and certainly the Palestinian experience, is one that will keep us enduring. But the key, again, is to move beyond the symbolic at this point and figure out how we can marshal economic resources, intellectual resources, how we can get together on the same page, and finally, how we can be self-critical. Because at the same time that we want to dismantle empire and we want to decolonize, we also have to decolonize our consciousness. We also have to get rid of the anti-Blackness in our community. We have to get rid of the Islamophobia in our community. We have to get rid of the anti-Arab racism in our community. We have to wrestle with each other. We have to dismantle patriarchy. We cannot continue to have a movement that is dominated and centering male experience, male needs, male desires, male bodies. We need a liberation movement that's truly liberatory. And we'll do it. We will win. We will be victorious, but we have to be honest about that and get the work started as soon as possible, which is now.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think we all agree that we came here as organizers, as educators, academics, students, but we leave as comrades, and we'll remain comrades, and we'll remain to do the work that we need to create the world that we need to. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to more discussions. This is a webinar series, so we will be having more of these, and hopefully we can have you back at some point. But beyond that, we will take this into the digital picket lines, because we are not in the same place, and we will support each other in whatever way we can. Jannah, Lubna, Obakeng, Mark, it's been so amazing to talk to you guys, and Amandla will continue. Power.
Amandla, thank you so much, Shaira. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.